Hello everyone. Welcome to one another, Wednesday where we have a live show. I'm Grandmaster Priyadharshan Kannappan from Gyaan Academy, and this is, I think, our fifth week of Wednesday shows, and the feedback has been tremendous. Thanks everyone for continuous support and feedback. So, every day or every week we have been talking about different grandmasters, and when I mentioned every day, it was the 21 Gems of Chess, a video series I did with Follow Chess app. You can watch all those content, all that too. That series ended with yesterday. That's why I had this everyday topic on my mind. So last week we did something new for the first time. We had a kind of something called think time, and I showed you a puzzle, and then I asked you, like to find the solution. So I thought, let's start with the solution for the think time puzzle that I gave last week, because I feel that would be the right thing to start. So the position I gave on think time last week was this. Let me pull up the position. So give me a moment. I'm just unable to find the position. Just a moment. Okay. Let me pull up the position. Okay, just a moment, audience. So this is the answer time. So for the think time, we know we need to have an answer time too, right? So let me pull up the position we have from last week. Okay, so here we go. So I hope the audience can see the position, and this was the kind of the position we had, and I asked it's white to play. And last week it was kind of special because we were talking about Benko and Reti, and I mentioned both of them are very famous composers. So it was like, what is the solution for white to play, and when was the position here. And the solution for this starts with king to g1. So actually the king was on h1. So this was the position, and some of you actually kind of hinted at it, king g1, because the problem for white is that white's key strength in this position is the pawn on b6, but just that white is unable to play b7 because of rook f1 check, and then the rook goes to b1. So some of you were kind of trying last week to see if rook b5 would work, but unfortunately just c b5, b7, there's rook b6. So rook b5 doesn't work. And then I think king g1 was suggested by few of you, but then when king g1 was played and I asked like what happens if rook f4, you were right to spot that rook b5 is a very strong move. Here the main idea being after c b5, this pawn on b5 is actually stop blocking the rook's path. So when black goes rook b4, the b6 pawn just rolls forward with b7 and b8 queens. And another option for black was for king g1 to go c5, and for c5, if let's say rook f5 is the strong move by white. So again we are kind of distracting the rook away from its key duty, the f6 rook, and after rook takes f5 we go b7. And in case for king g1, if rook h6 is played, then here comes the key move. I think most of them last week did not find it. And to the audience who are just joining in, if you can see my, if for now maybe you'll be just hearing my audio, just confirm if you can hear my audio, because as I'm explaining the solution from the last week's position that I gave as a study for the the viewers. So for rook h6, the key move that quite a few kind of hinted it but did not really spot was rook e8. The point of it being after rook e8, king takes e8, then we have b7. So this was the study composed by Benko, and that was this full complete solution. So okay, so now let's get back to our lecture on today's topic. So today we are going to be talking about Siegbert Tarrasch. I mean, people from who know chess history know quite a bit about him, but I'm not sure how much the current generation of players do know about Siegbert Tarrasch. So Siegbert Tarrasch was one of the strongest chess players in the history of chess, I would say, and he was a fantastic chess teacher and a doctor also on top of it. And it's estimated that he was possibly the strongest chess player around 1890ish around that time, but then he did not compete in a world championship match, which if he had did, most likely he would have become the world champion because he had such a positive score against William Steinitz back in those days. But he did not compete in a world championship match. And after Tarrasch, sometime later, Emanuel Lasker kind of came into the scene, and then Tarrasch really never had a chance to become, the world champion. So that's basic information about Tarrasch, and some kind of side like interesting tidbit about Tarrasch is that there are quite a few openings named after him. Some of the openings are very popular. Tarrasch in 1d4, you may have heard about it, and also we have Tarrasch key endgame idea, which is like kind of put your rook behind the pawn. If you're defending or attacking, that's the key thing. If you're defending, you have to put the rook behind the pawn, such that if you're attacking, then it helps the pawn to go forward, and if you're defending also, if you do it behind, you're kind of successfully stopping the pawn from going forward. So let's see this game. So Tarrasch starts with c3, and his opponent here is not someone that very famous, Leonhardt Paul Saladin, and he starts with c3, a very cheeky move if we have to say. We are very used to saying d4, e4, c4, but c3, and black goes f5. And let's say if I ask you a question, you play a game, and one moon, at what moon normally you get to see a new move that has never been played before. These days, at least, it's like move 10, move 15, because there's so much of chess games and theory being developed. And would you believe if I said that f5 was a novelty on move 1 in 1922? Yes, you heard it right. There was no games played before 1922 that reached this particular position on the board. That's a very nice thing, I think it's a very nice era to live back in those days when you can play some random move and it becomes a novelty on move 1 itself. So for f5, white played d4, e6. So we have a stonewall kind of Dutch position, just that the pawn is on c3 instead of c4 over here. And white has many interesting options. White played a very traditional standard move with g3. I think a more interesting, riskier option for the people who want to, have higher appetite for risk would be to go g4. The point of it being, if f takes g4, then you go e4, and most likely white will regain the pawn back on g4, and white has got a very good center in my opinion here. This is a higher risk appetite move, but I'm not saying this is better or anything than g3. It's just that it's a higher risk and higher reward possibly kind of variation. So g3 was played, which is the normal move which you would do if you play the c4 normal, stonewall Dutch. So black went d5, white goes bishop g2, bishop d6. And so I have a question here for the audience. How would you develop your pieces here? What would be your most normal development plan, and why would you develop that? I'll give the audience a few minutes to think about it, and then you can, mention your idea on the chat box so that we can discuss your idea and what possibly Tarrasch did. So the audience will have at least 2 to 3 minutes minimum to come up with some solid plans, and you can put that in the chat box. Okay, so like last 15-20 seconds before we go into the solution and the variations. Okay, so the traditional idea in this position obviously would be to develop knight f3, I believe, right? Just put the knight on f3, short castle, next move, let's say black goes something like knight f6 or knight d7, white short castle, then black goes knight d7. Very standard ideas, nothing wrong with this plan in itself. It's a very much playable plan, But there is a more refined or a precise plan to say for white in this position for bishop d6, and that is to go knight h3. So what is this knight doing on h3? I mean, it's kind of an odd looking square, right? I mean, when you go f3, you're kind of immediately aiming at what to say, this e5 square. That's kind of the key weakness, right? Because as black has gone d5 and f5, this square cannot be controlled by a pawn anymore, the e5 square by black. Only the bishop and black knights, those can kind of hold some sort of control over that square. So it's a huge outpost for the knight. So we should go knight f3, knight e5 would be the most logical kind of common sense move. But why is that not preferred or less refined variation than knight h3? We will see the idea of it in a move or two. The key point being white can bring this knight down to f3, that's one. So he has one knight going to f3. So I mean, this is the same as the knight on g1 going to f3. What is the key difference? The point of it is this knight on h3 will do a nice little swing to d3. Then you have two knights aiming at e5. That's the key aspect of this knight h3 plan. So for knight h3, black can go knight f6. In the game, black went knight d7. So if knight f6, let's say short castle, and white goes knight d2. So what should black do here? I mean, as I said, white's plan is kind of pretty straightforward. White is going to go knight f3. At some point, you're going to see knight f4, knight d3 ideas. So if you're, let's say, playing black pieces, you did get this position. How would you come up with some plans? Maybe you can try to stop it if possible, or do something active. So I would, suggest the audience to think for a minute or two, and I'll give you the time. So calculate the variation or calculate the ideas in which you can kind of try to safeguard the e5 square or outpost from white from completely occupying it. And once you have a clear idea, we can kind of, discuss about the moves. So there's another 30-40 seconds for the audience before I proceed with the move and explain what black should have done here. Okay, so let's jump into it. So the key idea of knight d2 is obviously now you're trying to go to f3 as I mentioned. So black has h6. So what does this move do? Key, if you think about it, is if you go knight f3 as I mentioned earlier, black has g5, and now g4 is a threat coming up, and f4 square is not accessible for the h3 knight. So white is actually kind of in a bit of a problem. Like white has to decide what to do. I mean, white may have to go back knight d2 or knight e1 or knight e5 so that he actually saves the knight, because g4, as is mentioned, is a big plan for black. So this is the key idea for black, to go h6. And let's say knight f4 is played here, then I feel black can just capture bishop f4, gf4, and think of some sort of g5 ideas also. This is also a very active plan for black. And for h6, I think white's best plan would be to not play knight f3 or just play e3 and wait, because if g5, white has moves like f4, and then the knight can come f2, d3 if needed. So this is a kind of a smart little move for white, I think, going e3 in this position, h6, e3 here. Yeah, so this is what the game would have transpired. But on move 5, black did not go knight f6. Instead, black went knight d7, and white went bishop f4. So is this kind of changing the plan a bit? Because I mentioned knight d2, knight f3, and then knight f4, knight d3. This is actually the right plan. You do want your knight to come to d3, but as black's bishop is sitting on d6, whenever if you go knight f4 directly, there's always the possibility for bishop takes f4. So white wants to exchange the bishop off first, so that there is no such option for the black to play bishop takes f4 and take the knight in such a case. And by going bishop f4, we are also, if the bishop gets traded, let's say bishop takes f4, knight takes f4, then the defense on the e5 outpost for black gets even less, right? Because the bishop is one of the key pieces for black, having some control on the e5 square. So that control is also lost by black. So for bishop f4, you would have naturally guessed what black should do or black should not do, and I wouldn't give any points if you guessed what move black did, because obviously black played the move that black should not have, and that move is he played bishop takes f4 here. So this actually helped white in his plan. So before we analyze what happened in the game, I'll just throw in some ideas like what black would have done. Black would have gone knight e7, and the point of bishop takes d6, cd6, black is very happy because this weakness is it's vanished for black now. It's not anymore because no knight e5 can land for white. So white goes knight d2, then short castle, then black can play knight f6, and white can still go knight f3, knight e5, but nothing very huge as an advantage or any of such sort for white is what I'm trying to say. White still has positional plus, but nothing huge. And the same kind of story would have repeated if knight gf6 also on move 6. And for the curious mind, for bishop f4, what about h6? Our same idea to go g5 and restrict the knight on h3. So I was thinking, let's say if knight d2, g5, then there's bishop d6, cd6, and white has a very powerful idea here. So we should not go f4 here, because f4, g4, knight f2, then we have c4 pawn break, but the key break, which is opening up the center, which is kind of weak for black, doesn't happen here. So white should instead go f3. The idea being white is going to go e4 and break open the center, and then these pawns are kind of very weak, and the king is extremely weak sitting on e8, and white would have a huge advantage in this position. So for h6, knight d2, g5 is not a great option for black. But let's see what black did. Black played the worst possible move, which is bishop takes f4, and no doubts white is going to capture with the knight. Gf4 is not what white has in his mind. So knight takes f4, and now black realizes, okay, I have given up some control of the e5 square, so let me put my queen and try to defend the e5. But knight d2, the story of this whole game, when you see the another 20-25 moves of this game, is that it revolves so much around this weak square on e5, and you can also learn that how strong an outpost can be decisive in a game. A strong outpost can influence a lot of your decision on a game. And another important thing that you will continuously have to keep in mind as you watch the remaining of this game is that why you should not make your squares very weak, in this case the e5 square. So black goes knight h6. I would actually give this an exclamation mark, because black is sensing the danger associated with the weak e5 square. So black wants to put the knight on f7, and then once the knight goes to f7, like white played knight f3, black goes knight f7. You see black has 1, 2, 3 pieces kind of having some sort of attack on the e5 square, whereas white as of now has 1 and 2 pieces on, or 1 piece and a pawn kind of controlling the e5 square. So white, obviously when white goes knight d3, it's 3 versus 3, that's an equal battle, so black will be happy with it. But what happens if white makes it 4 versus 3, and that's what Tarrasch did in his next set of moves here. So here knight d3 would be the most logical move if you think about it, but Tarrasch decided to start with queen d2. The point of it being, he's saying even if you had the slightest idea of, let's say, going e5 as black, it doesn't exist, because e5 would just be a terrible move, because I just simply play knight d5 and I'm a pawn up. So what happens for queen d2? Let's say if we go g5, push the knight to d3. White would happily go knight d3, because g5 was anyway, like white was going to go knight d3 irrespective of black pushing g5 or not. And knight d3, and I thought, okay, let's say g4. And now white obviously cannot go knight e5, because then we see that white is just losing a pawn. So white will go knight h4, and black goes c6. And here white has bunch of good options. One is like h3 is an interesting move. F3 is, I think, also a very good move, because after g takes f3, white can play bishop f3 or capture back knight f3, and then also plan to go queen f4 kind of ideas, and slowly play on the dark squares, which are very weak, as black does not have any control of the dark squares in the position. So this is gf3 knight f3 position. And another option, so we just talked about g5 and we also talked about e5, which of the both of them, one of them is terrible, one of them is interesting. G5 is interesting, e5 is terrible. So for queen d2, black played the most logical move, which is getting his king to safety with short castle. So for that, white, if you remember what I mentioned like 3-4 minutes ago, I said what happens if the fight for the e5 square becomes 4:3. So white does the step 1 for that. So white goes queen e3. So now already the fight for the e5 square battle is equal, because we have these three fighting for the e5 square and black has these three fighting for the e5 square. So 3:3, and we have the fourth fighter from white side ready, that is the knight on f4, because the moment he goes knight d3, we have 4 pieces fighting for e5 square. So just a simple mathematical majority itself will ensure that white has an advantage over the e5 square. So queen e3, very nice positional move. And also another key fact to note about queen e3 is that it stops c5 from being played. So black goes knight b6. I mean, he's like, I have to get my bishop out somehow. That's what I think was going through black's mind. I feel maybe black could try rook e8, but then rook e8 fails to knight takes d5. Simple tactic. And because e d5, then queen takes e8. So rook e8 would be a big mistake. So what else can black do? How is he going to defend this, e6 pawn? Maybe he can go knight b8 and try to come back knight c6, but not a big difference, I would say. So knight b6 is justified. And queen on e3 is actually very safe. The only problem for now is possibly some knight c4 and kind of kicking the queen away. So white plays nice little move b3, stopping all such knight c4 kind of ideas and stuff. So black goes bishop d7, short castle, rook a e8. So e5 is kind of being threatened, right? I mean, let's say if it's black to play, black would immediately, without even blinking for a second, would go e5 here, I feel like. But so does that mean should white go knight d3? This is a position where we have black has actually completed all his piece development. If you see, rook a8 was the last piece that was undeveloped, and with rook a8 black has completed development. So does that mean, is this the position where black transition into middle game? No, the transition to middle game has happened like multiple moves before itself. I think the moment black castled on move 10 itself, that transition from opening stage to middle game has happened. So then why is this a critical moment? Because as I mentioned, e5 is a big threat, and so far the first 13 moves of the game have revolved around the e5 square. So what should white do? Should white go knight d3, keep the control of the e5 square, or should white do something else? This is a question that I'm posing to you, the audience. So calculate a few variations, some lines. Don't restrict yourself to only calculating knight d3 and seeing what happens. I would strongly suggest look into some other options also for white, and then make a decision and put that on the chat box. So to the audience, I'll give you 2-3 minutes for you to calculate here. So take your time. So to the audiences who are just logging in, we are kind of 10-12 moves into the game, and right now the viewers have to guess what move should white play here. So white should white go knight d3 and fight for the e5 squares outpost, or should white do something else? So take 2-3 minutes, calculate it out, and then you can post it on the comment section if you want to discuss about it, and we can go from there. Okay, so there's like 1 more minute before I say what white played here and if that's the right move or not for white. So far, Tarrasch has played a very good game in this one, and we gotta see if his next decision is also a good one or if he started making some errors. Okay, so knight d3 would be your first reaction. Anyone they see this most position, they'll be like, yeah, I'll go knight d3. I'll just put my knight on e5. I'll be very happy, right? But knight d3 is not the best move. When it's, I would even say go to an extent to say knight d3 is a mistake. What white should have done is white should have simply gone a4, and if e5, then there is d e5, knight e5, and you have this a5 move. So the knight has to move away from b6, and then you pick up the d5 pawn, because once the knight moves away from b6, there's no support for the d5 pawn. So uh, k e5, king, you would not be able to play king e5 here in this position, Raj. So because the kings are on g1 and g8, so there would be no way the king can come to the middle of the board to e5. So for a4, e5, d e5, knight e5, a5, the knight would move somewhere like c8, then white simply captures, knight takes d5, and white has, okay, yeah, king knight to e5. So in this case, let's say what happens if knight e5, then black can go something like queen e5 or start with rook e5. I think rook e5 is more stronger, and if queen d4, something like trying to put some pressure down this pawn, then black can play c6, and if a5, knight c8. So black is still worse, but kind of some of his problems are getting solved compared to this position that we started here with after a4, over here. So that is why directly going a5 and winning a pawn is far more stronger. So why is knight d3 a mistake? Though it looks so natural to go knight d3 in this position and then just jump knight e5. So what would black play here, or what can black play here to kind of exploit the drawback of knight d3? So if you want, the moment I said drawback, what should kind of strike in your mind is like, what's wrong with knight d3? Because when we're exploring drawback, that means something was not so right with knight d3, or something knight d3 is giving black for an option, or maybe what the knight on f4 was doing is not being done right now, so black has some new options. So try to figure out what would you play as black. I mean, you have to accept that, yeah, my position is worse as black. Let's say if you are playing the black pieces, and now we have to put the best possible resistance. So what would be that best possible resistance move? So I would give the audience like a minute or two to calculate, and then once you've figured it out, we can discuss about it. Please post your move on the chat. So the question here is, what should black play, and why would you play that move here? Okay, like another 30-40 seconds, and then we'll start discussing the move. So if you have a move in mind, start posting it on the comments. So we have a4 here as a such, but a4 cannot be played. It's black's turn, so we can't go a4 in this position. So for knight d3, black should have gone bishop b5. So the idea is pretty straightforward. I mean, black just wants to play bishop takes d3, remove the knight away from there, and then there's less pressure on the e5 square. And let's say white goes knight d e5, black has knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and go queen e7. The point of it being that if a4 white goes, black has bishop a6. So some of you may have thought, why not just go directly knight d7 here? So here is where a4 is kind of a problem for black, because black, if black plays knight takes e5, then d e5, and the queen and the bishop are attacked at the same time. So this is not possible. And for a4, if something like bishop a6, then you just drop the knight with knight takes d7. This is also not possible. So for a4, black has to go bishop c6. But now, white can simply play b4, b5 ideas also. And knight takes c6 is also pretty much possible. Okay, so Raj mentioned about the move a5 in this position for knight d3. So a5 doesn't do much, because white then gets to do what he wanted, right? He'll go knight e5. So a5 is not an idea. And also another important, or kind of the problem with a5 is that if you'll see in which part of the board the game is taking place, you can clearly see it is the center and on the king side. So as the weaker side, in this case, which is black, you should not be playing where you are weak. So when you play a5, you are weakening your position even further, like your pawns are getting weaker on the queen side. So you should try to strengthen whatever is already weak, or should not make it even further weak, worse. That's an important point to note when you are defending. So a5 would make the position even worse for black. Instead, bishop b5 would be a far more stronger move. In the game though, black went knight d6. This move is kind of surprising to me, because black completely gives up all his control for the e5 square. So white happily jumps knight f e5, and point to note, he goes with the f knight and not the d knight, because the d knight still has some nice outpost squares, maybe c5 or f4, but that's not the case with the f3 knight. I mean, it's not going to go and be happy on g5 or h4. That is why knight f e5 is critical. And another important aspect of knight f e5 is that white can play f3 and go g4 kind of pawn breaks if needed. And by moving the knight f e5, you are activating the g2 bishop, possibly with some c4 breaks in the future. So with so much goodness behind the move, why not go knight f e5? So black goes knight e4, and white starts his plan. White goes c4. So c4's idea is kind of to break this diagonal, so that the bishop gets more activity. And also another simple logical idea is to go c5 and attack this knight. So once the knight moves, what the knight was doing, the knight was defending the bishop by here. So once the knight moves, that role doesn't exist anymore. So white will just simply be able to capture knight takes d7. So for c4, black went bishop c8, white played c5 and knight d7. So here both the knights on e5 and e4 seem to be strong, but only the knight on e5 is strong, because knight on e5 is in an outpost, but the knight on e4 is actually not in an outpost. So if you have studied what an outpost in chess is, it's a square or a thing where you can place a piece, and that piece cannot be really removed from there at all so easily. So in this case, the knight on e4 can be so easily removed the moment white plays f3. That is why the knight on e4 is in an unstable or a shaky position, and that is why it's not in a great point or a great square. But if you look at the knight on e5 for white, what can be really threatened that can make the knight move? Maybe you can exchange the knight on e5, but you cannot forcefully provoke the knight to go away from e5. That's why it's such a nice square for the white knight on e5. So for knight d7, white goes c6, b takes c6. Before b c6, let's quickly see what happens. If knight e5, white has d takes e5, queen g5. Let's capture some pawns. I'm hungry. Let's get some pawns. Queen a7, b takes c6, rook a c1, and both these pawns on c7 and c6 are hanging, and white should be able to convert them into a material advantage, and also the a pawn will start rolling forward, a4, a5, a6. So for c5, knight d7, c6, black played b takes c6, and white played knight takes c6, and black went a6. So here white realizes that he has created some new weaknesses. And a point to note is, look at this position. I mean, all these three pawns for black are connected, and then they are all very happy. Not, you cannot really see the weakness. But the moment you see knight takes c6 and a6 happens, it's kind of like this pawn is exchanged, so it's missing off the board, right? Now all of a sudden you see the weakness so glaring on these two pawns. It's like they have kind of lost a support system kind of thing. And so how can we exploit this weakness? And this is one of the problems or things that people say when you have pawns on their own, without any other support of pawns. Like for example, if you look at the a6 pawn, it does not have the support of the b pawn. It's supported by the bishop. The same goes with the c7 pawn. It's a very backward pawn. It cannot be supported by a fellow pawn, by a fellow comrade, but it has to be supported by a piece. So it's not that easy. So what should white play here, and how does white improve his advantage here? So I'll give the audience 2-3 minutes so you can calculate some good ideas. There are multiple ideas, so share what you would like to play here as white. So I hope the audience are all calculating some variations and figuring out how you know we can exploit those weaknesses that I marked on a6 and c7. So to the audience who have just joined in, we are kind of more than halfway through the mark for today's session, and now I have posed a question: what white should do here to increase his advantage? Okay, last like a minute before we start discussing the moves that would be good for white here. Okay, so let's discuss the move here. So in this position, white played rook a c1. So he's directly targeting this weak pawn on c7. White can also go knight c e5, f3, knight d e5, all these moves, and all of them are perfectly fine moves for white. So rook a c1 was played, and g5. So black realizes that he cannot passively continue to defend forever. He has to take some initiative related moves. So he goes for g5 followed by kind of f4 pawn push ideas. And white can go f4 if he wants to kind of kill all the counter play. But for g5, white just decided to go knight d e5. So white is saying, I'm not really worried about your f4 move, because after f4 then what do you do? I mean, I'll just move my queen away. So that's what white kind of has in his mind. So for knight d5, as I mentioned, f4, white can go queen d3, and if knight d6, white just simply goes a4, and then white goes a5. So some of you may ask, I mean, like a few minutes ago I said we should focus on the area where we are strong. I said this in wake of like black playing a5 in one of the variations. So why is white focusing on the queen side here? Because white is stronger in the queen side than black. All that black has, look at all his heavy pieces for black, they are all sitting on the center and on the queen side, center and the king side. So which are the pieces that is doing work for black on the queen side? None, except for maybe this minor bishop on c8. But so white can kind of use his rook, queen, all, and focus on the weaknesses on the queen side and pick up all the material that they can, and then get a very wonderful position. So in the game for g5 knight d e5, black went queen g7, and instead of, so we just discussed f4, so instead black went queen g7 in the game, and white played bishop e4. So is this a strategic decision? I mean, giving up the bishop should not be such a easy decision to make, right? Because I think the knight on e4 is worse than the bishop on g2. So why did white give up the bishop? The main point of it being, after let's say fe4 or de4, either of the captures in the game, de4 was played. But let's say if fe4, then white would just simply play knight d7, bishop d7, go knight e5, and then go rook c5, rook fc1. So the key point of it being, there is no more after fe4 this f4 kind of threatening ideas that you are seeing here. So white has just taken that completely out of the equation. So black cannot do anything with that. So that is why for bishop e4, black played d takes e4. So he still has some f4 ideas. But f4 would be a very sad move because e4 is always hanging, right? So that is why white decided that it's worth giving up his bishop in exchange for that knight on e4. So white just simply played knight d7, bishop d7, knight e5, and black went bishop c8. So here is a critical moment and white made a mistake. So I'll tell what was the mistake. So white played f4, and that is not a great move. White should have simply gone rook c5 or queen c3 as I mentioned, and target the c7 pawn. And as I said, f4 is still not possible because the e4 pawn is hanging. But white played f4. So now I have a question to the audience. What should black play? I mean, should black play e takes f3, or should black play g takes f4, or should black play h6, defend the g5 pawn, or should black go g4? So this is a moment where black has to make few decisions. I mean, black's position is clearly worse. He's been outplayed so badly. But I think the decision he makes here can improve his position slightly, more, and may give him some fighting chances. So yeah, take 2-3 minutes, calculate what decision you would make here, and then post it on the chat so we can discuss the move. And to the audience, the last 5 minutes most likely will be like a question and answer session today. So if you have some doubts in general about chess, or some specific chess questions that can be answered in a short span of time, I would be very glad to take them and reply, answer them at the end of the session. Okay, so audience still have around 1 minute, a minute and a half to calculate what you would play as black here. Okay, so I'm going to be wrapping up the time, so that we can discuss the move here. So for f4, as I mentioned, quite a few options: ef3, gf4, g4, h6, all this. h6, let's start with h6 because it's just a defending move, nothing very active about it. And then I feel white will just simply go rook c5 and go rook fc1, and where is the play or any sort of play for black? I mean, black is just pretty much his king side is the only side of the board where he has his major pieces, so he has to generate something on the king side, but unfortunately nothing can be generated here on the king side. So h6 is terrible. Yes, e takes f3 is the best move. We will discuss why that. Before that, we'll discuss what are the worst moves. So g4 is even worse, because at 6 at least you have a possibility to open the king side sometime in the future, but when you go g4 you're kind of like shutting it forever. No counterplay for black on the king side, so it would be a terrible move. And in the game, black played gf4, which is a mistake, and as the rightly mentioned on the comments, ef3 would be the best move. So why is ef3 the best move? And for ef3, how should white capture on f3? I mean, white has 4 captures, right? With the pawn, with the rook, with the queen, with the knight. So what would be the best capture for white is also another question we need to answer. By the way, ef3 is the best move, so very well done on guessing the move, Raj. So for ef3, let me start with the terrible capture, which is rook f3. The point why this is terrible is because black just simply goes bishop b7, attacking the rook on f3, and when the rook moves away, you have f4. So now you see that activity slowly starting to being generated by black on the king side. That is why rook f3 is terrible, because now black has control on this diagonal, and some, possibly if the g file opens up, white king is in big trouble. So rook f3 would be that worst possible move. Knight f3 is okay-ish, but still again, I need to consider what happens after f4 and so on. And I'm not very happy with knight f3 as a move also. And let's see queen f3. I mean, now we have stopped bishop b7. It's all good, right? But here black has a fantastic resource. So black can go c5. So is this just a pawn sacrifice? If you think about it, anyway, black is going to lose the pawn on c7. Maybe not, if not this move, maybe 10 moves later, because c7 is such a big weakness for black. So black should give up the pawn, because in return white cannot play dc5 here, because queen e5 and you lose a piece as white. But white has to play rook c5, but then black goes bishop b7. At least now the bishop is in a very active diagonal, so you get something in exchange for that one pawn you gave up, right? So you can put the bishop on d5, and then maybe you can consider some bishop a8, queen b7 kind of ideas, aiming at g2, h1, this diagonal. So it's worth giving up that one pawn in exchange for this counter play, but it's still pretty much terrible position for black. The position is still so bad. I mean, white can simply go queen h5, and white should still be able to win comfortably, but at least you die fighting instead of being passively and you're being slowly, losing the game. So the best move for white would be, I think, just simply capture e takes f3. So that if bishop b7, then you go rook f2 with the idea to swing the rook fc2, and if bishop d5, now this pawn is hanging or unprotected, so you go queen d3 and attack the pawn. And I like white's position here. White certainly is has an advantage. The only good thing for black though is that after ef3, you see that how much this bishop has improved. Just look at comparison between d5 and when it was starting on c8. So much more activity, so much more play, and more importantly, d5 is an outpost that the white cannot really push the bishop off so easily away from d5. So these are the key reasons why ef3 would have been such a strong move here. Instead, gf4 was played and queen takes f4 was played by white. So by capturing with the queen, white is now immediately adding indirect pressure on the c7 pawn, even though there is a knight in between the queen on f4 and pawn on c7. You don't know when the knight is going to move. The knight may move even next move, something like knight c4 and go knight e3 or something, and then there's going to be pressure down the c7 pawn. And another key aspect for you to note is that black has a light square bishop here, right? And look at where black's pawns and pieces are placed. Light square, light square, light square, light square. So much light square. Only the c7 pawn, these three are placed on a dark square, and the remaining everything is placed on light square. And the problem here is that as it's all placed on light square, it's actually restricting the movement of the c8 bishop to a large extent. Now let's do the same comparison with the white pieces. Before that, let me remove the highlights on the black pieces. So now let's do a comparison, because predominantly black's pieces and pawns were especially placed on the light squares. Now let's see where the white's pieces are placed. Dark square, dark square, dark square, dark square, here dark. We have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces on the dark square and 4 on the light square. So predominantly white is playing on the dark squares and black is trying to play on the light squares. So this is a color combination play that you normally see when it's between a, let's say, two bishops versus bishop and knight, or a bishop versus knight kind of thing, where the side with the bishop will try as much as possible to place the pieces that he has on the color of his bishop, and the other side, the opposing side, will place it on the side, on the square color where the bishop does not exert any influence. In this case, as it's a light square bishop that black has, it makes sense for white to place his pieces on the dark squares. That is why you see, queen f4, black goes bishop b7. As I mentioned, black really wants to get that his bishop to the outpost square on d5. So for bishop b7, white just decided to go e3. So what is this e3 move? I mean, why don't white just simply go rook c5? So here we see kind of a prophylactic idea of Tarrasch, I would say, because if you remember, some time ago we talked about how when this pawn moves away from, let's say, e4, like when the variation with e takes f3 were discussed, this bishop got so much more potential on this diagonal, right? So white just wants to kill that idea forever. So when you go e3, the e4 pawn is basically stuck. It cannot go any forward. That means this bishop is also stuck behind this e4 pawn. That's the idea why white goes e3 in this position here. So for e3, black goes bishop d5. And another point I wanted to just add about e3 is that white is in no rush. Absolutely no rush. Is this weakness going to disappear on c7 anytime soon? No. Is this weakness going to disappear on a6 anytime soon? No. Does black have any active plan that he can generate immediate instant counterplay, let's say in a span of 3 to 5 moves? No. All black can do is maybe go king h8, rook g8, rook e7. He can just simply defend. So if black will have to defend and will have to take the position slowly, white also gets that opportunity to take the game slowly, because white is in the driver's seat. White has an advantage here, so white can slowly take the position and take control of the weaknesses. So e3 is a move that fits perfectly to that weaknesses. So e3, black goes bishop d5 here. White goes rook c5, because the king side is kind of stable now. I mean, black cannot generate any play. So rook fc1 is up on the cards right now for white. White is threatening rook fc1. So black goes rook e7, rook fc1, rook a8. So I have a question to the audience here. So how would you continue here? Hello Shahid, thanks for joining. We are actually just near the end of session, but still we are very happy to have you on the session today. So we are right now talking about a game played by Tarrasch versus Paul Leonhardt in Mannheim 1922. So here the question to the audience is, how should white improve his advantage, or what would you play as white, let's say if you have this position on the board? I'll give the audience like 2-3 minutes so you can make your decision. And to all the viewers, I have some big announcements about the channel at the end of this video, so stay tuned. Don't log off right away after the game ends. So the question here is what should white play here, or what would you play as white here to increase advantage or kind of convert your advantage here. So once you made a decision, let's say you can post your move on the chat so that we can discuss about it. Okay, last 40 seconds before I jump into the variations and say what Tarrasch played here and what or the other okay or good moves that white has here. Okay, so let's see the move that Tarrasch played here. So Tarrasch went with knight c6. Is this the best move, or is there any other alternate that white can play? White certainly has a lot of alternates here. White can go rook 1 c3 if he wants. So what does rook 1 c3 do? It gives protection to this b3 pawn, so that white can go a4 a5. White gain more space on the queen side. White can play king f2 and then go h3, then go g4. It's a bit risky h3 g4, but that's also possible. And another ideas for white would include going rook a5 and then trying to go some sort of b4 b5. So many different ideas, but white decides to go knight c6. The point of it being, okay, simply he's just attacking the rook, that's one. And if black, let's say black captures on c6, which black did not do, white can simply play rook c6, and this pawn is being threatened. This is weak, this is weak. So black cannot go rook c8 because then you lose the a6 pawn. Black has to go rook a7, and then white can simply go rook 1 c5, and a complete domination on the board. Because now the right moment white can just go rook a5, pick up this pawn, and he can even play a4 a5 b4 b5 kind of ideas also if needed. So it's just pretty much black has to just simply move his king, maybe g8 h8 back, front and back, and at the right moment resign. So because of this, for knight c6, black went rook f7. He did not capture bishop c6, but then with this made white's life easier. White simply went knight 4. So now double attack or even triple attack, you can say, because a6 is also kind of a big problem for black, and knight d5 is threatened, rook c7 is threatened. So black played c6 and white just captured knight c6. And Leonhardt Paul Saladin resigned here because he realized that there is not much that he can do here, because anyway now the knight is still going to come back, knight e5, or maybe some interesting ideas for white include moves like knight b8, kind of trying to cut off this rook away from the game, and then go rook c8, and pretty much black is dead. So white won this game here, and a very powerful exploitation of a very strong outpost that black gifted early in the opening, and that all started with the knight h3 very early in the game, followed by bishop f4. So the main thing we can learn from this game, if you kind of play through the whole game at a single stretch, is you see how important an outpost and how you can use it to the best of the potential. And the whole game revolved move after move on how white exploited the e5 square for his knight and slowly created weaknesses. So as black player, in this game black may have learned that it's how careful you need to be when you push the pawns. So I'm not saying that giving an outpost weakness itself is wrong, but if you do give a weakness, it's very important you kind of know how to handle that. In this game, black played moves like bishop f4, which are so terrible when you give your opponent an outpost square. So those were the main things. So to the audience, if you have any questions, you can put the question right now. I'll answer them before the end of the show in like next few minutes. And the announcements that I had. So as you may all have known, this Wednesday show has been going on for 5-6 weeks now, and there has been a considerable amount of feedback that I've received on what or how to proceed forward with the show. And many felt this 1 hour time, for a show is a bit too long. And so I've decided to come up with most likely 5 minutes or less show every single day, or maybe every alternate day instead of 1 day a week show. And this is just a minor one show change that we are thinking about doing. So you'll have all the updates in the Facebook page of the Chess Gyaan Academy channel, so you can see that. And those sessions may be live, some of them could be recorded. I think in 5 minutes it's very tough to do like a completely live session, because by the moment you say start and done, it's like the session is over. So predominantly we will be moving towards a recorded sessions with some live sessions thrown in here and there, where you can ask questions, and where you can interact with me. So also, if you have any feedback on what you would like to see, let's say in just 5 minutes a day of chess, if you want to discuss what would those topics be, feel free to post them in the comments of this video. I'll look into it, or you can come into the Facebook page of Chess Gyaan and comment there. What would you be interested in learning 5 minutes every day, or 5 minutes every alternate day from a grandmaster? So that feedback I will include it as I curate and create the content for those sessions. So that was the big kind of a news that I wanted to share. So that does mean next Wednesday we will not have this 7 to 8 p.m. show. Instead, it will come in a different format to you. So yeah, so the question we have now is how to improve calculation. So calculation is primarily visualization plus how many candidate moves you see and what moves you don't miss. So to improve visualization, it is very important you see a lot of things on the board. I mean, better overall spatial view of the board is very important. So you need to solve a lot of tactics, a lot of studies, a lot of puzzle. That's only one part of it though. If you just I have seen players who have like amazing chess.com tactics rating, or some other chess playing websites tactic rating. They'll have like 3000, 3100 tactic rating, but their over the board strength would be 2300. So what happens is, after a certain point, it's basically pattern recognition. So you just keep doing the same thing again and again, and then they just don't even realize that it's not beneficial to them anymore. So my advice is spend 10-15 minutes every single day at least on solving puzzles, tactics, kind of mix it up. Some days puzzles, some days tactics, some days studies, mix that up. And the another part of how to improve calculation is try to read, or play through some chess games on your head without setting up a chessboard. Try to, like, let's say you pick up a 30 move game, try to visualize the whole game on your head without a chessboard. So pick up any chess book you have, see a game, and then there will be diagrams for you to guide. So in case if you forget the board, you can look at the diagram, but don't play through it on a board. Don't do it for all the games. If you are on the beginner level, try to do it maybe one game out of 5, one game out of 6. This will help you. Yeah, okay. So if your tactic rating is 2012, set goal based improvement. So maybe you can set, okay, in like 15 days I want to reach 2100. So how do I do this? Then you have to once you set a goal, you will kind of be more focused on it. And another important thing is, if you are playing let's say blitz or bullet online games, because these days there's no tournament happening right now, so analyze those games. Maybe not bullet much, you do have to do blunder check in bullet games also, but blitz games you can certainly analyze, you can certainly see where you are going wrong. In faster time control, how your brain thinks, you need to be self-aware of the mistakes that you are making even in blitz games, because once you are aware of that, I think you can easily figure out what are your weaknesses and where you need to improve. So my suggestion on how to improve calculation: regular tactics solving every day, maybe puzzles, studies, tactics, anything, you need to do it regularly. That's one part of it. Second part, visualization. So pick up one game maybe every week and try to play through it blindfoldedly, in the sense without setting up a chessboard. You can just open up the book, it will have diagrams, and then you can try to make the moves on your head and try to complete the full game with analysis on your head. Initially it may be very tough if you have not done this before, but as you make it a habit as a practice, it will become easier. So these two would be my immediate suggestions, and there are other tips and variation, other suggestions also, but some of those are not very easily explainable, and also it differs player to player. Like, we gotta analyze what's your strength and weaknesses, and based on that only I can suggest few more things. So those things, if you are very interested to know how you can improve further and all that, you can certainly think of taking private sessions with me through my academy, Chess Gyaan. You can find the details on chessgyaan.com, or we have other coaches also who will help you to work with on improving your calculation and so on. So that is an option also. So certainly look at our website, chessgyan.com, if you want to learn further on how you can improve calculation. So you can we can discuss about private classes and so on. So yeah, so that's the main information. I think that would be helpful for you on how to improve calculation. So that brings us to a wrap on today's session. Thanks everyone for joining today's session, and if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to it, because we have so much content coming up on the next few days. And also there is a series of playlist called 21 Gems of Chess, where we have discussed the games of some of the best legendary chess players out there. So don't miss that also. Go ahead and watch them. So everyone, stay safe, stay home, and bye bye. And thanks once again for logging in. Signing off as Grandmaster Priyadharshan from Chess Gyaan Academy. Bye.